Hello, I'm Keith Ghostland.
I'm Ann Charles.
I'm Linda Quinlan. It is March 12, 2019, Tuesday, and welcome to All Things LGBTQ.
And she might have known what the date is because it might be someone's birthday.
It is. Thank you.
birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
And what was edited out was the year in which she was born.
Yes.
Looking at local and regional, some events coming up, there might be a book release in September, and we're hoping to interview the poet in August. And what might be the title of this new narrative?
Well, the book of poems is called Chelsea Creek.
And the poet might be someone we know?
It's me, and I was very excited to get the news that my manuscript of poetry will be coming out in September. So it's good news.
Stay tuned.
Yes.
It's part of the Wicked Women series.
Yes.
I have no comment because there's so many places we can go with that. Other events coming up. Stonewall 50 organizing meeting on Monday, March 25th, 6 o'clock, Senior Centers. Remember, Larks and Raven, contra dancing, Capitol Grange, Saturday, March 30th, starting at 8 o'clock. Pride Center, every Wednesday, 4:30 is their LGBTQ people with disabilities group. Please know that it's there. And on Monday, March 18th is Women's Game Night, a hot item. I'm going to talk a little bit about legislation, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about why, if you're HIV positive, the London patient and the Dusseldorf patient would be of interest to you.
I have several items of interest, including
No ducks.
the most no penguins,
Penguins.
tonight. Ducks. Most LGBT-friendly countries to travel, according to the Spartacus Guide, which has just released its new edition. Public outcry after the Women's March Malaysia pushed for LGBTQ rights. Raphael Trzaskowski, the Warsaw mayor, faces backlash for protecting LGBT rights. Luxembourg Prime Minister takes Arab leaders to task on gay rights at a summit. 2 gay men run for Guatemala Congress, and I have their pictures. The first is Aldo Davila, and the second is Otto Rene Felix, and they are of the left wing in Guatemala and hopeful to be elected to Congress. I'm ready, says the first transgender candidate for the Thai Prime Minister, and that's Pauline Nyampreng, and I have a picture of her before you. She's not favored, but she's enthusiastic and hoping to move the conversation toward LGBTQ rights. Bollywood releases its first ever lesbian rom-com. And I have a picture before you now of the cast of this film. And finally, I have a section of a song I want you to hear by Mashru Layla, the Lebanese indie band that champions Arab gay rights. We'll get to many of these stories throughout the program, in the program.
Are we hearing the clip now?
No.
Okay. All right. I have for some headlines, the high school prom bans same-sex guests even after the lawsuit about it. There's a consent form apparently that has to be signed that says that students either have to be 10th graders or 21 and under, and they must be same-sex couples. They cannot be an opposite.
No, they have to be
The
opposite
opposite couples.
sex couples.
They can't be same-sex couples.
Correct.
So,
Mississippi.
thank you, Tremont, Mississippi.
Yeah.
So there we go. The Tampa mayoral election, Jane Castor came in with 48% of the vote. Not enough to win the election because they need 50%, but she got more votes than any other candidate by a wide margin. Castor's the former police chief. of Tampa. Methodist leadership doesn't comprehend that gay people can be spiritual. At the end of February, the United Methodist Church Conference voted to make it harder for LGBT people and to penalize pastors who serve openly or who perform weddings for LGBTQ people. Country singer Cameron Hawthorne comes out via his new video. White House host, is it Jair Bolsonaro? How do you pronounce his first? Jair. Bolsonaro.
Oh, a deplorable.
I know. Anti-LGBTQ activist nominated to run the Office of Violence Against Women, Janet Gosling. Lori Lightfoot, a progressive black lesbian, is in the runoff for mayor of Chicago. That will be very interesting. And My Pillow founder, remember all those commercials?
Yeah.
My Pillow, My Pillow. He's one of those endless ads on TV. Mike Linden thinks that Trump was chosen by God.
There we go.
And he's going to save the U.S. from political correctness.
Ooh,
I need to send my pillow back.
I know.
I never bought one.
And H.R. 3222, Do Not Harm bill, would forbid religious objection to any health care service. I'll talk about more about that later, but back to Keith.
And did you get the Equality Act is being reintroduced
Yes.
this week? There are 230 reps and 46 senators who have signed on as co-sponsors. And the LGBT caucus in our Congress has increased to 155 members. So, but here in Vermont, as I pick any camera I want, this is crossover week. And for those of you who are not familiar with our legislative process, this is the point at which is determined within the legislative session that a bill is only guaranteed to be acted upon within that year if it has passed from one chamber to the other prior to this date. And it's 40 days after the legislature convenes.
When does the legislature end?
It is scheduled to end March 10th.
Okay.
By statute. Bills that we're looking at, H3 has made it through both the House and the Senate. Senate did make some amendments, so it was on the House calendar today
Okay.
to vote to concur with the Senate amendments. If that indeed does happen, then it will go to the governor for signature, and it will be the first bill enacted into law during this session. And this is the Ethnic and Social Studies Standards Curriculum Group,
Okay.
of which the LGBTQ community is decidedly included. The other bill that has made it from one chamber to the other is the minimum wage, $15 an hour by 2024. So it has moved through the Senate. It is now in the House. They're looking at the House taking action, and it will go through multiple of the money committees.
You know, I think by the time 2024 comes around, $15 an hour, I mean, it's
When you look at the curve of rate of inflation, cost of living, et cetera, it will be slightly ahead of where it could have been on its own. So
Yeah.
it will have an impact, but not as great an impact if they did it, say, this year.
yeah, which
So-
would be very helpful.
What hasn't made it through, though, is H107, which is the paid family leave. That's still in House Ways and Means. They're still trying to figure out how to fund it sustainably. What hasn't made it, even for our first committee discussion, is H185, which Representative James talked about on our last show, with nonconforming and transgender students being able to participate in gender-segregated athletics. I can play on the women's basketball team. Indigenous Peoples Day is getting a little movement this week. Whether it makes it through from the Senate into the House is yet to be seen. There are 3 bills that have all of a sudden shown up about bias and hate crimes and bullying. And they're all having committee discussion in judiciary committees in both House and the Senate. Whether any of them can move it fast enough to get it to the other chamber by Friday is very questionable. However, the actions that they're taking and the manner in which they're doing it is very similar to the parentage bill from last year, where it didn't make it by crossover, but both judiciary committees thought it was a bill of such importance that they started to work independently so that regardless of when it came over, they were ready to act.
Okay.
So I'm kind of hoping that that's what's happening with this. And fasten your seatbelts. Constitutional Amendment 5 is starting the debate this week, and this is the right to personal reproductive liberty. So everything that we all heard about protecting your right to choose in the House is about to happen again in the Senate. And the reason the anti-choice people are pushing so strongly, this is the first time they've really been able to debate this issue to this degree. This is their last opportunity.
May it be their last.
Well, this would, if when enacted, this will become a constitutional amendment.
Well, I know.
Argument over.
I know.
All right.
So what you got going?
I got lots of stuff, including
I know you got lots of paper.
including advice for gay travelers.
All right.
The Spartacus Gay Travel Index has been reissued in the 2019 edition, and there have been some changes. One of this year's rising stars is India, but thanks to legal improvements as well as anti-hate crime initiatives, Portugal, for the first time, managed to jump from 26th place to the top, and it shares the first place with Sweden and Canada. India has moved up thanks to the decriminalization of homosexuality and an improved social climate. It's risen from 104th to 57. In 2018, the criminalization of homosexual acts was abolished also, as I reported at the time, in Trinidad and Tobago and Angola. However, the situation for LGBT travelers in Brazil, Germany, and the USA has worsened. In both Brazil and the USA, the right-wing conservative governments have introduced initiatives to revoke LGBT rights achieved in the past. Therefore, there's been an increase in homophobic and transphobic violence. In Germany, there's also been an increase in violence against LGBT people. Inadequate modern legislation to protect transgender and intersex persons, as well as the lack of any action plan against homophobic violence, have caused Germany to drop from 3rd to 23rd place. Countries such as Thailand, Taiwan, Japan, and Switzerland are under special observation. This situation is expected to improve in 2019 as a result of the discussions on the introduction of legislation to legalize same-sex marriage. Thailand has already moved up 20 places to rank 47, thanks to a campaign against homophobia and the introduction of laws to recognize same-sex civil partnerships. The already announced introduction of same-sex marriage laws could make Thailand the most LGBT-friendly travel destination in Asia. In Latin America, the decision by the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to require nearly all Latin American countries to recognize same-sex marriage has caused a sensation. So far, same-sex marriage is legal only in the countries of Argentina, Colombia, Brazil, Uruguay, and some individual states of Mexico. So if you're making travel plans, you might consider this. Let me just briefly tell you about the International Women's Day March in Malaysia, which included open support for the LGBT community. This is in a country where the tourism minister told German reporters that he wasn't aware of any gay people in the country. 2 Malaysian spokespeople have spoken up in favor of same-sex rights. Organizers of the women's rally on Sunday urged spectators to focus on the march's demands. They urged people to ignore the moral panic instigated by the media and amplified by political opportunism. More than 300 people gathered in Kuala Lumpur on Saturday. Marchers raised placards in support of LGBTQ rights. They also flew rainbow flags, and there were chants of "Leave LGBTI alone" and "Long live LGBT," according to Malaysian sources. So, in Warsaw, Rafał Trzaskowski, and I have a picture of him with some LGBTQ advocates in Warsaw. He signed a declaration, the first ever LGBTQ plus declaration to be signed in a Central European country, the first document to officially recognize LGBT rights in Poland. A spokesperson for Love Does Not Exclude is quoted as saying, "Aside from implementing specific solutions to the issues of our community, today is about joy and pride about living in Warsaw, which is becoming a rainbow city and a beacon for the region." So there was a little backlash, but LGBT people are being affirmed in Warsaw. We know that the mayor is being flooded by homophobic rants, but Warsaw citizens need to show that there's a need for basic protection in this city, and the mayor is...
Where's Poland on the list?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked, because I have the list before me. You go on to your stories and I'll be able to tell you.
Okay. Latisa Nixon, the mother of a black man who died in Democrat donor's home, sues for wrongful death. Jamel Moore, her son, and the man who died by an overdose while inside Ed Buck's house. She is also suing city officials in Los Angeles. So I guess there's been no progress on bringing him to any kind of justice or any kind of scrutiny, apparently. I didn't see it, but there was a Michael Jackson HBO special that raised many questions about Jackson's legacy. Oprah Winfrey did it, and it had a few survivors on there talking about their experiences. It can be seen on HBO if anybody would like to see that. Chelsea Manning is sentenced to jail for contempt of court again. And South Carolina school rejects fourth grader's essay supporting LGBTQ rights.
Because it was not age appropriate.
Yes. Church janitor wows American Idol judges with a song about being allowed into heaven. And he's gay. Jeremiah Harmon of Baltimore sang his original song, Almost Heaven. And for International Women's Day, Gays Against Guns stood in silent protest of the steps of the New York Public Library to honor women who have lost their lives to gun violence, and I have a picture of that you can see there. And the White House is...
Getting whiter by the moment.
I know. Is welcoming
And writer.
Bolsonaro, Brazil's anti-LGBTQ president. He has a long history of homophobia, racism, and misogyny. Bolsonaro criticizes gender-based ideology, saying it threatens Brazil's Christian values. He would rather have a dead son than a gay one, which we've heard. He likens indigenous people to animals and said that a female legislator was too ugly to rape. Despite his troubling record, our president is welcoming him with open arms to the White House.
And maybe a little fast food.
Yeah, a little McDonald's.
There we go. I was thinking Chick-fil-A, but okay.
Well, that's a Chick-fil-A story here.
Yeah.
of that woman who quit. But H.R. 3222, Do Not Harm Bill, would forbid religious objections to any health care service. Representative Joe Kennedy of Massachusetts and Bobby Scott of Virginia introduced the Do No Harm Bill, which would amend the 1993 Religious Freedom Restoration Act to specify that religious exceptions should not apply to protections against discrimination or equal opportunity. The legislation is intended to clarify that no one can seek religious exemption for laws guaranteeing civil and legal rights. And mostly this was aimed towards, I think, the hospital care and that kind of, so that, you can't go to the hospital and someone says, well, you're having a heart attack, too bad, I don't want to deal with you. So, and here's a story about college dean quits over Chick-fil-A.
She's staying in the university.
She's teaching,
though.
but yeah. Cynthia Newman, dean of Rider University, says she's resigning her position over the school's opposition to the popular restaurant chain Chick-fil-A.
No, over the school's opposition or the school's support of Chick-fil-A?
No, she's quitting because they wouldn't allow Chick-fil-A to come to the school.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, I misunderstood.
Yes. And she said that she is a committed follower of Jesus Christ.
Oh, my gosh.
And
You didn't read far enough.
Yeah.
I know.
And she couldn't stay in her position, though she is going to still stay there and teach. She felt like she was punched in the stomach.
Oh, my
So
gosh.
there you go. And gay South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete, and is it Bugajig?
Who did Jake?
has,
Who
lo-
did Jake?
has launched his
That one.
exploratory committee. He is 37 years old and was married last June. He recently called Mike Pence the cheerleader of the porn star president.
Exploratory committee, huh?
Yes, yep. And so anyway, I think we'll go to.
I think we're the only three people not running under the Democratic Party for
No
president.
kidding. No kidding.
So sit back, relax. We're going to talk a little bit about HIV. People have known for a significant amount of time that there were some individuals who seemed to be resistant to becoming infected with HIV. And what they were able to identify is a condition that was called CCR5 Delta 32 genetic mutation. Write that down, there will be a quiz. And the theory was that these were people predominantly of European descent whose ancestors had survived either, the Black Death, bubonic plague, or smallpox. And that genetically they had built up this resistance for becoming infected. How it related to HIV was there was the incident with what was called the German patient who was being treated for cancer. He got bone marrow transplant from a person who was HIV resistant, and it cured his HIV. They couldn't find it. So what has come up recently are two separate cases, one in London and one in Dusseldorf. And it was both individuals who were HIV positive. They had both been on antiretrovirals for a while. So that figures into the equation. They were both given a bone marrow transplant or bone marrow stem cells from an individual who is HIV resistant. There was a curious thing that happened with trying to reject the cells but then accepting them, and they're trying to figure out how prominent that aspect is in the overall outcome, because then they waited a bit, took both individuals off the antiretroviral, and there's no detectable HIV. So this bone marrow from an HIV resistant seems to, and they're reluctantly saying cure.
Yeah.
Or they're saying puts it in remission. However, the real push is still to advocate that people take PrEP. Let's avoid becoming infected versus trying to treat you afterwards. The estimate is that currently only 35% of gay and bisexual men take PrEP. which, however, is an improvement from 2014 when it was only 6%. But they're looking at a much higher rate. They're sort of advocating everyone needs to.
And this genetic
And-
bone marrow thing is really painful, so you don't want to look towards that as a cure. You want to look
Well,
to
it-
maybe as something that can be developed into some kind of cure.
Well, and also there are over 37 million people worldwide who are HIV
Right.
positive. That's a whole lot of donors.
Yeah.
But this is showing that there are advances. People are continuing to look at this, and oh my gosh, look at what we found.
Yeah.
Just as an aside, one of the first individuals, and we had talked about this before we started taping, one of the first individuals in New York who was identified as being HIV genetic resistance, his partner was one of the first people who died from within the epidemic. One of the things that we need to be mindful of people with HIV resistance is survivor's guilt. This individual put themselves out for research, but ultimately committed suicide because they had lost so many people. Why am I still the person who is here and remembering? So we need to include that in the equation. And where are you taking me to now?
Well, I'm reporting that Poland is below 47.
So they're not doing that well.
Right,
47.
below
What are we?
47.
No, what is the United States?
47.
And what's Poland?
below?
Below us.
Oh, below it. Okay.
I,
How
I-
about Russia? Never mind. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Russia's at the bottom.
Well,
Didn't
of
I tell you
course,
that?
yeah.
Russia, I didn't report that?
No, you
Russia,
did.
Syria, Yemen, I did report it?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't tell you the title of this Bollywood rom-com, which is How I Felt When I Saw That Girl. We can surmise
I like
the plot. But I'd like to, dwell a little bit on Luxembourg and a Lebanese rock band. The Prime Minister of Luxembourg, Xavier Bettel, and I have a picture of him before you. He's confronted Arab leaders over the repression of gay rights, telling them his same-sex marriage, he's gay, as we've already reported many times, would condemn him to death in some of their countries. The conference room at the summit of the EU and Arab states fell silent when he made his statement, according to a German journalist. Retweeting this account, Bettel wrote, saying nothing was not an option for me. He signed the tweet. He's the first EU leader to be married to a same-sex partner. He'd planned to make the intervention before arriving at the summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, which was the first gathering between the EU and the Arab League. As we know, homosexuality is punishable by death under Sharia law in Saudi Arabia, Sudan, and Yemen. Other countries in the region prohibit same-sex acts, including Algeria, Morocco, Oman, Tunisia, Syria, Kuwait, and some of the United Arab Emirates. Syria, which is suspended from the Arab League, was not represented at the summit. Bettel's point is underscored by the treatment of the LGBTQ community in Egypt, the country that hosted the summit. And I'd like to add that Egypt and China both censored Rami Malek's Oscar acceptance speech because he mentioned that Freddie Mercury was gay. Egypt charges people under the euphemistic charge of debauchery, although homosexuality is not illegal there. El-Sisi came to power in a coup in 2013. He appeared to embrace persecution of gays and trans people, according to a human rights report. EU leaders say they raised human rights with their Arab counterparts. The EU had to acquiesce, however, to Arab demands to drop a reference to freedom of expression in the summit communique of more general wording in favor of more general wording on upholding international human rights law. Somebody a former journalist who was jailed for his political activities in communist Poland, said, "I really appreciate how enthusiastic your media is. It's impossible in Europe to have such a reaction." This was when the Arab League's watered-down statement was released, and everyone applauded it, but this gentleman, Mr. Tusk, was being sarcastic. So, most EU presidents and prime ministers took part, while the most controversial Arab leaders stayed away, including the Sudanese president Omar al-Bashir, who was accused of war crimes, and Saudi Arabia's crown prince Mohammed bin Salman, who is disreputable because of his. But I really want to talk to you now, just for a moment, about Mashru Leila, the Lebanese indie band that champions LGBT rights. They
Is
have.
this when you're going to sing to us?
No, I'm not going to sing, but they are. As they celebrate their 10th anniversary, the four-piece band are already on the Arab world. They're already the Arab world's biggest indie group. They're probably the most successful Arabic language band internationally. They have a European tour lined up and a new compilation. We didn't have expectations, says drummer Carl Giges in a French accented English. The band wasn't meant to last forever. I have a picture of them before you. From left to right, Firas Abu Fakir, Carl Gerges, Haig Rapizan, and Hamid Sino, who is in the front. Hamid Sino is gay. And they were the band that was singing in Egypt when the rainbow flags appeared and 75 people were arrested. They looked on powerlessly from abroad. They're Lebanese. There was no national infrastructure to support them. Everything in their early years was improvised. They won the opportunity to record their debut album in a radio competition.
They're not going to go to these countries, are they?
They sang in Egypt, but now
Really?
they've been forbidden in 2 countries,
Right.
which in the past was their biggest fan base. But now they have an international following. Because of their outspoken support for LGBTQ rights, Sino is a rare out-gay figure in Arab media. They have received more press for their politics than for their music. Sino finds himself saddled with being a voice for Arabs, Muslims, and the Middle Eastern LGBTQ community. What bothers him most is when Western media treat the band's progressive politics as exceptional. It can't be that absurd to the Western imagination that there are many liberal Arabs inclined toward gender and sexual diversity. He says hotly. To write them off because of the oppression of free speech in their countries does everyone an extreme injustice. The band's politics saw them banned twice from playing in Jordan. They said the band is immoral and we incite a revolutionary feeling in people, says the instrumentalist Abu Fakir. At their biggest concert ever, this is the Cairo incident that I told you about. Now looking to a Western audience, they've started writing lyrics in English. But Sino rejects the idea that this makes them less authentic. There's something to be said for a band from the Arab world to make it, regardless of language. And apropos of this new turn toward English, I'd like to show you now a short clip from one of their songs called Ghosts. And there's a reference to Debe in it, which means it's a Middle Eastern folk dance. So.
سكينتي واتدبكيت رقصت تحت ضوء إشارة السير لانتشيت عالكهربا من انخاع العمود وصبيت دموع النيون عالسوقات العيون والطربش خدونا عالحبوس عشان يخصونا ويعملوا أوسام خيطنا لن أعلامنا من أكفان جثث لأصحاب اللي كانوا عالأعدام خبز الغراب غداً ممنوعة الغرض غداً يما خبز الغراب غداً ممنوعة الغرض غداً يما. وقضيت عمري مع حقي مرهون لأحاسيسك وانمحيت من كتب التاريخ كأنه تاريخك وركنا ترجمنا لون أبيض صف وأبو نويس بلسان القهات عالشراشف طرزناها بالقهات نشدناها بالمظاهرات خبز الغراب غداً ممنوعة الأرض غداً يما خبز الغراب غداً ممنوعة الأرض غداً يما. خبز الغراب غداً ممنوعة الأرض غداً يما خبز الغراب غداً ممنوعة الأرض غداً يما. عليلي كعبك بالغنى قدر أغني عليلي كعبك بالغنى قدر أغني ممكن عليلي كعبك بالغنى قدر أغني ممكن عليلي كعبك بالغنى قدر أغني.
I could talk more, but I'll leave it there. It's a great group, though. I found myself
Singing along.
drawn into all of their songs, which some are translated, some not.
Well, I really just have one story that I was going to talk a little bit about, and
Then I forgot to do the trivia question at the beginning.
at the end.
Do it
No, I
at the
didn't.
end now.
I didn't say it at the
now you'll
beginning.
have. Do you want to do it now and then have people think about it, and then I will just do this last piece.
March 1986, front page of Out in the Mountains. They were promoting a public hearing, joint House and Senate committees to talk about to take testimony on H622, an anti-discrimination bill. And this was one of the first pieces of legislation advocated by the growing politically active LGBTQ community in Vermont. What would the bill have done?
Okay, let's think about that for a minute while we just do this one story. And this is about, this is an anti-LGBT activist nominated to run for the office of violence against women. nominee to lead the office is former prosecutor and right-wing culture warrior who notably believes that women who are armed with guns are less likely to be raped. While the nomination of Shannon Lee Gosling was announced in June, a hearing date has not been set. Anti-violent organizations are mobilizing to play defense against her being being
Approved?
yes. Unsurprisingly.
Confirmed.
Confirmed. That was the word I was looking for. She's also racist and homophobic. In 2007, she defended the owner of a popular cheese steak shop in Philadelphia who displayed a sign in his shop said, "This is America. When you're ordering food, please speak English." So that's the nomination for violence against women. And now we have an interview. Anne is going to interview Andre Mole, who is a minister at the UU Church in Burlington. So take it away, Anne.
I'm here with Andre Mole, who is Developmental Assistant Minister at the First UU Society of Burlington. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. I see that you were ordained on October 27th in 2018.
Yes.
Would you mind telling us a little about your journey toward ordination?
Yeah, sure. So my family and I moved here to Vermont in 2009. I've been living in New York City and had a young family, and city life was getting a little daunting, raising a family there. And long story short, we decided to move here to Vermont. And one of the things I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do was what I wanted to do when I grew up. I knew I wanted a vocational change, but wasn't quite sure what that would be. And I think Vermont gave me the space to figure out my own call to ministry, which is part of the Unitarian Universalist faith. And so I began seminary a number of years ago and just recently finished that and got ordained by the lovely folks at First UU in Burlington. And it's really been an honor to be up there and be part of that congregation and to be practicing ministry with them.
So you sort of mentioned that you had a corporate past, and so
Yeah.
you wanted to change from that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Was it the open spaces of Vermont, or
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a couple things. I mean, I spent almost 20 years working in human resources, and one of the big parts that I was doing was leadership development with people. And so a big aspect of that really was important to me was this idea that we're all always growing and always figuring things out about ourselves and learning. And while I like that in the corporate environment, there was something about it that was limited to me because I felt like I wasn't working with my whole self and I wasn't working with the whole selves of people that I was with. And so I was really active in my local congregation, and that's where I realized that by shifting my vocation to ministry, I could work with the whole person, right? Because I'm working with them on their spirit and what it means to be in this world, and what it means to be the people we want to be, and that we're called to be in this world. So that was really a big part of my calling and my path.
So tell me, what does a developmental assistant minister do?
It's a fancy title, but we've got a big congregation up in Burlington. So I'm one of two ministers on staff. I'm the assistant minister, and I focus on pastoral care and membership, so helping welcome new people that are coming into the congregation and being with congregants as they have major things going on in their life. You know, it could be hospitalization, it could be a death, it could be a major spiritual trauma in their life. So part of my role is being with them and journeying with them.
I first met you at the production of Transcripts.
Yes.
Were you that play that we all have recommended?
Yeah.
Were you instrumental in bringing that to the UU Church?
Not at all. I think we're privileged in having a space that's pretty well known in Burlington. So a lot of people come to us and book that space. And so that play had been booked there. And I'd started working there and saw that it was on the calendar and then reached out and said, hey, how can I support it? So I played just a very minor role in helping welcome everybody there when the play was put on as one of the ministers on staff. But yeah, I had nothing to do with actually getting it up in the sanctuary.
So do you compose sermons? They used to call them sermons in my
Yeah, I
religious
still call them
environment.
sermons. Yeah, so in our denomination, we're pretty liberal in how we look at our worship services. So unlike a denomination that may be, for example, Christian focused, where most sermons might be focused on a specific text from the Bible, we pull from a whole variety of different sources and different experiences. So that might be Christian, it might be Jewish, it might be Buddhist, it might be from our own experiences. So being a trans minister, I definitely pull a lot from my queer identity and my identity being who I am in the world, and that will enter into the sermons and the worship services that I create for sure.
Would you mind telling me a little about TRUST? TRUUST is the acronym.
Yeah. So within our denomination, Unitarian Universalism, we have a number of individuals who are trans and non-binary who are religious professionals. So they're ministers, they're seminarians, they're religious educators, they're administrators, community ministers. And so we have an organization where we support each other and in our roles, in our work, and being trans individuals within our denomination.
And as a group, you've responded recently to a controversial article that appeared in the UU World. Can you talk about how you respond to conflict in the UU Church?
Yeah.
You may want to draw some parallels to conflicts else in other denominations.
Yeah, I think we're at a time where a number of religious institutions are wrestling with what it means to include LGBTQ folks within their denomination. Unitarian Universalists have often been in the forefront of that. In the 80s and 90s, we were one of the first denominations that were welcoming LGBTQ folks into our congregations. A lot of our congregations were really behind the push for marriage equality, but other denominations have followed suit as well and are looking to include queer folks into the experience of their church life. And you see some of it in the news with the United Methodist Church and their struggles that they've had over the last couple weeks. And within Unitarian Universalism, one of the things that we're struggling with specifically is how to deeply include trans individuals within our faith. Mm-hmm. And so, there's one step, which is saying you're welcome here, and you belong in a religious community, specifically in our religious community. And then there's the actual experience as a trans individual of going into those spaces and being fully accepted for who you are. And so that's a lot of what was behind what you were reading online, and something that we're definitely wrestling with as a faith community.
Do you have discussion groups, or I understand there are a lot of offshoot social, intellectual, philosophical activities that occur at your church. Is that right?
Yeah.
Study groups and...
So each congregation nationally kind of has ways that they structure their conversations and their interactions. So up in Burlington, in our congregation, we have book groups, we have discussion groups. We might have things that we as ministers or staff or lay leaders bring into our worship services. And so there's different ways that we will bring topics like this forward and think about what does it mean not only for us within our denomination, but within Unitarian Universalism. Many of us are really talking about how do we live into what Dr. King used to call the beloved community, right? So how do we live into welcoming and embracing the diversity of all of humanity? And so that's a big part of what we're talking about when we're looking at inclusivity of trans folks as well, because it's not just about trans individuals, it's about all number of identities, whether it's people of color, people of different disabilities and different abilities. And so we're talking about how do we create space for all of that beautiful diversity of humanity.
Can you my special interest is book groups. Can
Yeah.
you tell me? I know here in Montpelier they had a discussion of that book, White Fragility, which, you know, as we know, confronts racism in
Yeah.
primarily white progressive communities. What else? What have you been doing up in Burlington?
Yeah, we've been having a lot of book groups as well and discussion groups and looking at how race plays out within our society and how do we fight we call white supremacy culture that all of us are kind of immersed in, and how do we break that down, whether that's within our congregations or within society. So we've had book groups on that. We've had discussions around magazine articles. Again, we've created worship services within our congregation that will deal with those particular topics as well.
How many people go to these books, and do you have any idea how many people are in your congregation?
Yeah, our congregation is about 450 people, and so we have different discussion groups that are of different sizes. So it really depends on what's going on and what topic we're wrestling with. But
And facilitators step forward and say, I'm really interested in this book or this topic, and then
yeah,
you sort of say, go with it?
yeah, it depends on the topic. But yeah, sometimes we'll have just a small book group that's looking at a specific topic, and sometimes we'll say, this is a really important issue for us to look at, and we'll gather, 50 plus people for a number of different workshops and go deeper into a topic.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a committee system composed of, I guess?
We definitely have committees that look at, what we're going to focus on or what types of social action we're going to take within the community. And we'll take steps toward that. So a committee that's focused on racial justice or immigrant justice. So there's different
LGBTQ committee or?
Yeah, we've had those throughout time. So there's definitely a lot of action, not only in our congregation, but many other UU congregations here in Vermont with the marriage equality debate. And so there were a lot of groups that were really focused at that time.
And you have coalitions with grassroots secular groups here in Vermont.
Right. So we'll often partner with local partners, and sometimes in Burlington, sometimes what we do is we'll give space to specific groups to use our space for meetings, or sometimes we'll be looking at specific organizations that we might partner with that need volunteers or are working on a specific issue that we might partner
All
with.
right, but do you have any idea of the demographics of your congregation in terms of class, race, gender, identity?
Yeah, I don't have all those statistics off the top of my head, but I do think that just speaking about religion overall, a lot of people say that Sunday morning is still one of the most segregated days of the week because in many places, this isn't just Vermont, there's not a lot of diversity within congregations. Within Unitarian Universalism at large, it's predominantly white, predominantly middle class, predominantly college educated. And so that's something as we've been having these discussions about race, about class, we wrestle with, how does that play out within our faith?
That's a great project. How are you bridging the gaps, or if there are, how are you reaching out to other classes and races and,
Well, I think that one of the things that we're realizing is that often it starts with us and looking at ourselves as individuals, but also looking at the groups, whether it's the congregations we're in or our faith at large, and how are the ways that we act or the biases that we have keeping us siloed, right? So if I bring it back to the issue of how do we include trans individuals in our religious organization, or I think any religious organization, it's about how do we create relationships with each other that really deeply honor our differences, right? As a trans individual, I want to be welcomed, but I don't want you to have me here because, despite the fact that I'm trans, I want you to welcome me here because I'm trans. I want you to see my talents and gifts that I have to offer that come deeply from my experiences in the world. And so that takes really wrestling with the biases that we might have or the assumptions that we're making about individuals. So a lot of times what I say to folks is, how can we sit and get to know each other and not ignore our differences, but really appreciate the differences of each other and appreciate that how you are radically different from me is part of the beautiful spectrum of humanity, of being in this universe. And isn't that an amazing thing? That yes, we're human beings and we have that in common, but you're radically different than me and you have different gifts that you bring to this world. And how can we honor that in each other?
That's a wonderful way to end. Thank you, Andre. I hope you'll join us again to
Thank
talk
you.
more about your work, and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
So, Miss Ann, I didn't realize you had such a vast ecclesiastical knowledge. Oh my!
Who knew?
Oh, it's very informative interview.
And now we have an answer to a trivia question.
March 1986, first, real public hearing and bill that our community advocated. And it didn't pass this year. It did not pass in 1986. H622 was our first attempt at an HTLV3, now known as HIV, anti-discrimination bill. It would pass the following session. Vermont enacted its anti-discrimination legislation in advance of the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act. So we were in the forefront. Major opposition to the bill came from the insurance industry.
Oh.
No surprise there. Well, thank you, everybody. And remember, as we move forward, to resist.